Welcome back to Metropolis, hosted by myself, Calden Datsimpa. It is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. I am here with holiday joy. Christmas is approaching, as are other holidays. How are you, Drew?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Happy to be here.
That was Dru Oja Jay, my guest for today. He's the publisher
I'm still here.
at The Breach, executive director of CUTV, and he is still here. He just nodded. We have audio listeners too, Drew. You gotta make sure you communicate in a way that they can hear because they cannot see us.
Vocalize my presence, absolutely.
There we go. It's been vocalized. 2024 has come and gone. It's already the end of the year. It felt like it went by quick.
It did go by quick, yeah. I was just saying before. I feel like it's sort of an in between year. There are some big things that started this year, but I feel like it's mostly just a continuation of the absurd amount of history that's happening to us and around us.
History just keeps happening. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's gonna reach any kind of conclusion in 2024.
History?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think history is going to end anytime soon.
We didn't start the fire, if you will.
They need to make an updated one. Great song by Billy Joel, which we do not have the rights to, so we will not be playing that song, but you can go ahead and Google it. Today's episode, I want to go over the stories which I feel were the most important ones, more remarkable ones of 2024 for Montrealers. There's a lot of stuff that happened this year. The eclipse happened this year. We don't have too much to. There's not too much news about it, but it was just I found it was quite a profound moment for me at least. Did you get to enjoy the total solar eclipse this year?
I did get to enjoy it. Yeah, I was down in the West Island next to the water, and it was affecting for sure. It left an impression, and kind of a little bit surprising. You know, I don't know. You get older, and things don't feel that surprising, but that felt surprising.
It's cutting through the jaded lens you have on life.
Absolutely, it did cut. It cut through absolutely.
Yeah. No, I kind of feel that as well. It's like leading up to it. It's like I think I've been looking. I wouldn't say I was looking forward to it for a few years, but I just knew it was sort of on the horizon, right? It's like, oh yeah, we have that eclipse coming up in a few years, and this year it's finally happening. I had some friends come up from New York, and like on paper, like you know what to expect. So you have that giant ball of fire that we call God once.
It's daytime. It gets dark.
Yeah. The classics.
just playing the hits.
Yeah. But it was interrupted for that one day. I was completely kind of mesmerized by it. It was like, as much as I knew what to expect, as much as I understood it on paper, actually experiencing it was something entirely different.
Mm-hmm. We didn't start the fire, but the fire did stop for a brief moment. Yeah.
You're really sticking with that.
I'm trying.
Try a Piano Man now.
Well, John at the bar is a friend of mine, so.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Anyways, I thought the eclipse was a nice point to start off. Just speaking on like these remarkable moments as incredibly affecting moments. But then that's happening up in the sky. On the ground, there's other things happening that are equally as arresting, equally as arresting, just as concerning, and maybe even like a little terrifying.
All those things have characterized 2024 in Montreal for sure.
Yeah. Those are if we had like a big like word web, boom, those are the words. Yeah. So I picked out some stories I thought were remarkable that kind of represent a sign of the times, perhaps, and might inform us on what to expect in these coming years. And just I don't know. I always think these kinds of like moments, like the end of the year, is always a good moment to like.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good time to reflect on everything that's happened and just sort of reflect. It's always a good time to reflect, but end of the year, that's time for a long reflection.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at our coverage, I think the McGill encampment in solidarity with Palestine
absolutely
looms pretty large.
Yeah, that was. That was a big one. It was a big one leading up to the year. Huge moment, I think, for the movement. You saw it like develop. Montreal one stuck around a lot longer than the initial one at Columbia. Went through its own struggles. The injunction request against it was refused. There's a lot of stuff about that. I was really surprised at how long it lasted. I was expecting a lot more. I mean, there was so much, I guess, opposition to it, but they were not able to rally themselves as quickly as I expected.
Yeah, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by the sort of reflective hesitation of our normally swift to crush dissent legal system.
Yeah.
So you have judges who are almost certainly not on side with any of the causes being represented, who nonetheless, came to some slightly novel decisions, albeit temporarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Aside from the encampment, you had I think some things I've selected was a fire in the old port, and this fire is not like other fires, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some specific dimensions to it that I think are quite concerning, quite revealing about, I guess, the direction of the financialization of housing, wanting to turn real estate into quick profits, and at the same time, while doing that, skirting safety. And I think there's also some things we saw about this fire that reveals how enforcement by the city, by the province, is sort of lacking, right? And as much as we can point at the landlord and building managers for keeping this building unsafe, the question is also can be levied at the city and the government bodies for not doing their proper job inspecting, or I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, there are fires that where you sort of notice that it happened. You see the news story, you're like, phew, I'm glad that wasn't my house, and you feel bad for the people who were affected, and then you sort of move on. And then there are other kinds of natural disasters or fires that really sort of reveal, that sort of bring into relief something about how the whole system works. And I think this is one of those, so we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Not all disasters are natural, and there's always preparation we can do as a society, as a collective, to prepare for these things. And I think that that fire we're going to talk about is a huge example of some of those things that are lacking. Of course, we had the other story I wanted to talk about that happened this year is the anti-NATO protests. So in classic, I guess, Montreal fashion, people got to the streets.
There was a little bit of smashy.
A little bit of smashy. Get that in quotes. We're gonna use that. We're gonna use that for the thumbnail.
A favorite pastime of a certain subset of Montreal's population.
Yeah, absolutely, and not even just Montreal. I think I feel like there's things you see. Maybe it's like a remnant of like older kind of like anti-globalist protests. I feel like there's a common thing that like any kind of like G8, G20 protests. Yeah. You have the black blocs that show up either here, Quebec City, Toronto. In fact, but I mean, this year the anti-NATO protests, I'll say this group was like smaller than before, smaller than what we've seen, but the international press attention has been kind of
this struck a nerve beyond Montreal's shores, shall we say?
Yeah. And I guess what's significant about why it struck a nerve is perhaps the timing of it. Here we are in a moment where people are maybe questioning NATO, where NATO is sort of at least on the mind of parliamentarians, government officials.
There are questions hanging in the air, absolutely.
Donald Trump, perhaps. Oh,
Donald Trump.
Went there.
Has some thoughts.
Absolutely. Does he ever? So we'll talk about the anti-NATO protests. And then switching over to electoralism. Who doesn't love electoralism? Who doesn't love democracy? Well, this year we exercised a bit of democracy here in Montreal. There was a federal by-election in the riding of LaSalle, Verdun, Aymar, in the southwest of Montreal. Lovely area. We saw the Liberals lose another seat this year. They lost one in another by-election in Toronto earlier this year, and then they lose a second in Montreal. People are ringing the bells. People are saying it's the end of the Liberals. They're probably right.
I mean, usually by-elections are kind of like, the like template commentary is like, well, we can't really draw any real conclusions based on from this, but there's a new MP in this area, and maybe it means that this party's doing badly, and maybe it doesn't mean that at all, and then you move on. But I feel like the last several by-elections, the one in Toronto, the one in Montreal, and now the one in Langley,
Just recently,
BC,
in BC,
are have a much bigger, stronger role in the sort of construction of narratives around national politics.
I'm gonna say there's a pattern.
You-
I'm gonna risk it all and say
Yeah.
there's a pattern with these elections.
Yeah. Keen data analysts may be able to discern
I need
some commonality between these three results.
This is a hard job. No, but we'll get into why. What these by-elections. Well, what the Montreal one at least spells out for the island of Montreal. What we should expect from the next federal elections here in Montreal. Of course, city centers are always hot spots of activity during federal elections, and I think this by-election. I think that you have almost all the pieces of what I'm expecting from the next federal election in Montreal. You know, you have this kind of like ascendant bloc. You know, they're back. Bloc is back, baby. It's the 90s again. I saw some people talking about potential bloc opposition, just like they had in the 90s. Would be crazy if they did. But I think there's also kind of like there's important commentary on that about why the bloc does.
The
so
90s
well.
are back.
The 90s are back.
What are you gonna do?
People are wearing big jeans. People are skateboarding.
Just windbreakers.
Windbreakers. Oh yeah. The 90s are back. Yeah, that's
And speaking of
elections,
hot topics.
Election hot topics in Montreal. Valérie Plante,
Yeah.
our mayor, will not be seeking a re-election. She announced at a press conference that come next municipal elections next year in November that she will not be leading the party into another mandate. So what does this mean for Projet Montréal? This means they are hiring.
Yeah.
Nous embauchons,
As they say.
There's
a sign in the window,
Mhm.
and a sign of the times as we take also a look at Valérie Plante's legacy.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to look back on what she's done for the city, what she hasn't done, and I guess consider the different pathways forward for Projet Montréal. We can do a little brief. We're gonna look at the 4 candidates so far, although it's
and specifically the possibilities and the sort of horizons, such as they are or may not be, for progressive change and the ability to empower the actual population of the city.
Drew's very excited.
I mean, I look for whatever possibilities are available, and
Absolutely.
that's leadership races are always slight
Who-
openings.
Who's gonna drive the party? But I guess I shouldn't say drive because that's kind of car centric. So who's gonna be at the first seat of the tandem bike that is Projet Montréal? We got so far 4 different candidates. Like I was saying, some of them represent continuation with the Plante administration. Others sort of represent slight deviations from people who are more unknown, recent elected officials. Should be interesting how.
We'll take a look at it.
Yeah. So let's get started with the first topic here of
Sure.
the old Montreal fire. So I mean, like, fires are like you have. So I was saying, like, you have 2 types of fires, right? You have the accidental fire of, like, I don't know, a kid left like a turkey on, and like maybe that's a really specific one, but like just some kind of like accidental scenario.
Did you have
I
a
never
moment with the turkey at some point?
I never had any moments with turkeys, but I will say as a kid I did love playing with a magnifying glass. And one time when my dad was sleeping in the living room, I was burning some flyers and he smelled smoke and he woke up and he was like, "What the hell is happening?" Anyways, yeah, but there's no fire started there. It was just smoke. You have those kinds of fires. Let's say the accidental
Sometimes there's
ones.
smoke, but no fire.
Sometimes there's smoke, but no fire.
In this case, there was both.
In this case, there's both. There's tragedy. It's really tough. You have the kinds of fires that are accidental, and then you have these kinds of fires, which I think are indicative of gaps in our system. It's like a mix of gaps in our system. It's a mix of people just skirting safety completely.
I'd say it's like the core of the housing crisis, really. I mean, it really gets at sort of I think it really sort of throws into relief what's happening with the housing crisis. So So yeah, let's I guess we can talk about the 2023 fire and then the 2024 one.
Yeah, so there's two fires that we're going to talk about. Both of them are connected. It's the same landlord who owns both buildings in the Old Port. He owns actually multiple buildings across the island, but these are just two of his buildings in the Old Port, which caught fire over the last 2 years. You had one last year in March, which caught fire. It turned out that place was sort of like a ghost hotel, this kind of like illegal Airbnb operation that was running. The building caught fire. People died. Tragic. I think he got pursued for it. Then this year, another building of his went up in flames. It was not quite. It wasn't this time. It wasn't an Airbnb, but it was this sort of like 20 room hostel accommodation above a restaurant. Of course you have the connecting factor of both these buildings being owned by the same person, Ben Amor. But you also have the thing about that connects these two different buildings where you have this thing of like short-term accommodations happening, right? And of course, like you're in the Old Port, touristy area. You're not gonna want. You could have option one is you have regular tenants who are gonna pay the old Montreal prices, which is like maybe upwards of like $2,000, or you have short-term rental, and you get something like $6,000 a month, right? If not more. From these
yeah, it depends depending on how you chop it up, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of chopping it up, I mean these places are like, specifically the one from the Old Port fire last year. These are like windowless bedrooms. Talk about chop it up. These places are like subdivided to hell, and the end result is like a very kind of like small living space, which is kind of like it's like clearly an afterthought the way these places are set up. Or the kind of amenities of I don't know, having access to sunlight. We have a video here we can watch.
Yeah, who knew that one of the perks of, I don't know, having actual hotels is that they have fire escapes. Not the first thing you think of, but certainly something I think about every time now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, do I want to stay at a hotel, have a fire escape, or do I want to save a little bit of money and just have no windows, shitty amenities? No housekeeping. Actually, no, there probably is some housekeeping. But yeah, let's check out this.
Let's check it out. Yeah.
This is a video by the Montreal Gazette. It's a 2022 video tour of windowless Airbnb unit in old Montreal building that burned down.
Voilà, et bienvenue dans le home tour de Lucan. Porte d'entrée, tac tac, on rentre par là, serrure connectée. Ensuite tu débarques là, ça c'est les traces de neige parce qu'ici la neige elle laisse des traces. Tac. Ça fait comme ça, comme ça, comme ça. J'ai pas tout rangé, je t'avouerai. Voilà, t'as un joli miroir, mais évidemment, personne avec qui prendre de photos. La salle de bain, on allume, tac, 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 tac. Là, on a la cuisine, le salon, qui ressemble à ça, avec... Putain, faut que je tende mon linge. Mes valises que j'ai pas défaites. Et la chambre qui est là en bas. Et comme tu peux voir, tu vois, c'est un peu bizarre parce qu'il n'y a aucune fenêtre. Genre là, il n'y a pas de fenêtre. Là, bah, vue sur ma chambre, super. Et là-haut, bah, c'est entre deux apparts. Du coup, il n'y a vraiment pas de fenêtre, comme tu peux voir. C'est le seul truc un peu louche. Voilà.
Un peu louche.
So, I mean, what we saw there for our audio listeners was the tour of this small, like, one-bedroom apartment. It's kind of like pretty standard, I guess, apartment. It's just like you had that exposed brick wall, bathroom, pretty simple. I mean, the highlight of that video, I mean, the point thing for that video was that bedroom.
Yeah.
With just no windows in it at all.
Yeah.
The only windows were sort of like into the living room area, but there were windows that were facing like a sort of an empty space between two apartments, so there's like no direct sunlight getting in there at all.
And that figures crucially in the story of, I guess, the first fire.
Yes.
Where there are people in this sort of calling 911 from like a smoke-filled windowless room in the middle of this building, you know, and they're stuck and they can't get out, and they're like, "Come get us." Anyway, just absolutely just gruesome.
Yeah. I don't want to get too much into those accounts, but like if you look them up, they're just it's just harrowing. Like even for this one that happened this year, it's like clearly like.
I mean, some of the people who survived like jumped out of windows.
Yeah,
from the second story.
Yeah, absolutely terrible.
And then you have the fire chiefs literally saying like, window is not actually an escape. Like that's not actually like a real way to
escape.
To escape a fire.
Who would have thought?
But you know, if you have no other option, then I guess it is. But
yeah, there's some reports of these places that talk about. I mean, so that's one thing that was common between these two buildings that caught on fire, the one last year, the one this year, about these places that are windowless. There was reports of by housekeepers of like these places, either some of them had fire alarms, some of them didn't. Sometimes the fire alarms didn't work. The housekeeper at the time was saying that like she just did not feel safe working there at all. If you look into the Google reviews for these places, a lot of people complain about these windowless places. A lot of people talk about the was one of these buildings had a fire escape, but like it's completely unstable, unusable.
Yeah, it's unclear whether this applied in this case, but Ricochet, a national publication that has been really focusing on Airbnbs and their sort of negative effects, calls it the Airbnb shuffle.
Yeah.
But basically, where there's this sort of like denial of responsibility, so the landlords will make more money by like renting at some kind of extremely inflated rate, and sort of look the other way while this so-called entrepreneur like subleases or basically sublets the rooms on Airbnb. And takes the risk and I guess the responsibility for code maintenance, so the landlord can sort of like wash their hands of their sort of responsibility to have fire detectors, for example. But then the this so-called tenant is basically paying like twice the rent or more, pocketing the difference, and then like chopping up these rooms and selling, and then like renting them out on Airbnb. So, in violation of the city regulations. And the city has been sort of trying to enforce this to some extent. They give like 100 and change.
126.
126.
They've given out 126 like citations, like fines over this, but
the maximum fine is $4,000, which is just happens to be the difference. Basically the difference in the amount of money you can make by subleasing on Airbnb for 1 month.
Yeah.
So there's, you need to get into the five figures at least to be able to like disincentivize this. Otherwise, you just eat the fine, take it off the market for a few months and then start up again. It's like jumping this turnstile at the metro.
Right.
Every single day. And then you pay the $100 fine once every 3 months.
Yeah,
it's still cheaper, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You're pretty much just paying $100 maybe a year or however sneaky you are for metro access.
But the difference is that the social shame would stop most people from doing that. But landlords have a slightly different mentality when it comes to these things. Yeah,
it goes into it's just that business expenses, perhaps. There's so many different aspects to this. I think is interesting, right? Because you have this. Let's go with that $4,000 thing, right? Of like, if we're talking about the kind of fines proportional to this kind of income, it's clearly not really. It's like barely a drop in the. I mean, it does set them back a little bit, but like it doesn't really like you're saying disincentivize.
Yeah, it's a month-to-month setback. It's not like there's no like, oh, this ruined my year. It's like, oh, this month was a little tighter.
Yeah. Like purely on like a fiscal basis, it's really not this.
You make up for it with your Bitcoin investment or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, Trump got elected. It looks like I can pay the fine off with my. But yeah, I mean, it's a thing where like I think I like that the jumping the turnstiles analogy. But there's another thing I remember. It's like if you're this rich person with like, let's say you have a nice Bentley, and like you're trying to park downtown, you just park it somewhere you're not supposed to. They're gonna fine you maybe like $140. That's just the cost of parking to you. At a certain point of money you're making, these kinds of fines just end up being part of the like just the cost of
proportional to income. It's the same.
Exactly.
It's like when I pay parking downtown. Proportional income, it's the same as
it's devastating for you.
it's devastating, absolutely, to pay $15 or whatever. But if somebody's making 10 times the income of me, they just it's the same thing.
Nothing for them. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there's an issue with that is kind of this thing of that the city. I mean, not even just the city. You have this a lot of places in North America where these fines are not really proportional for, I guess, the offenders, right? I think. I mean, there's that. There's that maybe I shouldn't quote it, but it's something like if a fine is just like a flat fee, it's just essentially just targeted towards poor people, right? It disincentivizes poor people because that's gonna like be a huge chunk for them. But then for anyone who's making above like whatever like um above board is going to be like nothing for them. I remember it's interesting. Like, go ahead.
I was just going to say the social democracies in Northern Europe are sort of famous for.
That's exactly where I wanted to
go
go.
ahead, yeah.
That's exactly where I wanted to go.
I'm trying to remember the name of the hockey player, but he got like $100,000 speeding.
Yeah,
ticket or
exactly.
something.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing, right? Well, like imagine like I mean, that,
in Finland, I think. Yeah.
yeah. So we're talking about like oh, that's the cost of parking. A little fine. Well, in Finland, they're like, no. In Finland, it is my belief that at least for speeding tickets, those are indexed to your income through some database. So if you are a millionaire and you're speeding, you best believe the speeding ticket is gonna hit you and it's gonna hurt, right? It's not just gonna because otherwise it's just a little inconvenience. But there have been speeding tickets of like six figure speeding tickets.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing, and it's a creative revenue generating idea as well.
Absolutely.
It still doesn't really compare because like a $200 speeding ticket or parking ticket is like can be if you're trying to like, if you're a paycheck to paycheck and need to feed your kids, like that is way more devastating than like having to like put off your Bentley payments or whatever, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not it's not in the same universe, but it's still a just sort of an obvious progressive measure, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, so we have that aspect of the fines, right? This $4,000 fine that's clearly like doesn't really make a dent. But then there's also the thing of
and they were saying that like 60%, there's like 10,000 Airbnb listings on the island of Montreal. And
tens of thousands. Yeah.
But like 60% of them are more are from users that have more than one listing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're not dealing with people who are like subletting their like spare room. What you're dealing with is people who are renting entire apartments and then like pocketing the difference, right?
Of course, yeah.
And using it as a speculative asset. And so, and those people, like somewhere in there's somebody who's making a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And $4,000 is not the pain point that we need.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, we're talking about these tens of thousands of units, right? And I guess the other issue we come to here is sort of the ability of the city to really enforce these kinds of bylaws that they have against these types of units.
Yeah.
For these tens of thousands of units, Drew, how many inspectors are there?
3.
Correct. It is.
Yeah, it's grim.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's the thing,
and
right?
that's just at the city level. At the provincial level, they have other regulations that they don't seem to be implementing at all.
Yeah. I mean, there's interesting, right? So on that provincial level, it's like there's that report by the Logic, which is kind of touching upon the fact that like Legault does actually have the jurisdiction to actually like clamp down on these, but
absolutely,
I think the report pinned in on just sort of like him having barely any base in Montreal. And for that reason, not really wanting to like even like
the CAC has no seats in Montreal. They just don't.
They got the one.
They don't. Oh, they did get the one.
They have the one. The one right at like the Point de l'Île, like right on the east end.
My apologies to Francois.
Credit where credit is due.
Absolutely, gotta recognize.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they wanted to build the REM extension out there.
Right, that's true. But yeah, I mean they could regulate, but they're not putting any money into the
playing
into
politics.
The enforcement, right?
They don't have their voters there, so they're like, what do we don't want any. We don't. There's nothing for us to gain in terms of vote share there, which is of course like
you have to pay some
disgusting politics when you could be like protecting people's lives, actually like using these institutions for what they should be doing of like I don't know securing life, making sure people are safe, but they're not. They don't seem to be interested in that. And of course on the city level, just a complete lack of resources to really tackle this problem. Because if you have 3 people over tens of thousands of units, that's concerning. There's gonna be like places that go by uninspected. Even this place, which was inspected, I was surprised that they flagged them. They flagged the Benamour's units for not having fire alarms, but then when they inspected afterwards, the fire alarms were there, so they're like, it's safe.
But I think if you zoom out, Airbnb is actually like probably a relatively small part of like the real estate speculation problem.
Yeah.
And obviously the bigger problem is just the fact that we're treating housing as a commodity at all, whether that's Airbnb sort of sub rentals as a sort of obviously a rampant problem that is causing housing prices to go up, but just the fact that housing isn't just somewhere you live, it's a speculative asset now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there's condos that are going empty or that are being bought up by, rich people who have like multiple properties as investment properties, and then they're subleasing them, but then because they're paying speculative market rates, they have to raise the rents to like pay off their mortgage, and it becomes a whole thing. So that's and that's why someone like Pierre Poilievre can come to Montreal and say like, oh well, rents have tripled, and be the only one who's talking about that, because nobody else wants to like zoom in on that, because with the Conservatives you can just say, oh well, let's do what Texas does and like just build more houses. The Liberals and the NDP are going to be like, well, we don't want to talk about housing being a speculative asset, or like a commodity, because that if we speak out against that, it will like piss off our, I don't know,
Voter base.
our landlord and real estate developer donor base. Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there, and I think there is a sort of an awkward transition happening among the Canadian electorate as well, where renters are becoming the majority, but in terms of who's actually voting, I think the perception among political parties is the more reliable voting base is still the homeowners, who are I think fading out of the majority. It used to be the solid majority of people were homeowners in Canada. No longer, and especially in major cities like Montreal, like it's definitely majority renters. But political parties aren't acting like it, because they still want to please that sort of
reliable base of
exactly,
homeowners,
those people who turn out to vote at higher rates.
Who's speaking for the renters? Who's speaking for this increasing renter class?
Literally not a single federal party, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Unfortunate. Yeah. No, you see that in a lot of their, I guess the optics or the way they try to position these things, right? They always try to. I feel like it's like you have this housing crisis happening, right? And it's of course fueled by this kind of financialization and this sort of treating as real estate and homes as assets. And then I feel like the solutions given by the Liberals, at least that I'm familiar with, even in the NDP, sometimes it's like, well, here's a new sort of very specific kind of loan to people between the ages of 22 and a half to 34. You can apply for this special loan that's going to take some money out of your this, and then you can put into that. And it's just so like
super complicated.
It's so complicated. It's so complicated.
Means tested all the heck. Yeah.
Means tested to hell. So far away from like, I mean, of course that applies to stuff like that. Does not apply to renters at all, right? It applies to whatever small section of people who are still buying homes, right?
Well, they're trying to keep the housing market fueled by like subsidizing first-time homeowners, so that you can get more people into that homeowner ladder. But like the price just keeps going up, and so you're basically like signing up, instead of signing up like you would in the 70s, because there was social housing, which we then subsequently gutted, which fed into creating housing as a speculative asset, which meant that for that golden period from like the 70s to now, if you bought a house, it would continually increase in value. And so that's nice for all those people who bought houses in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
I should have been doing that,
but
instead I was busy not being born.
But yeah, exactly. And now you're signing up for debt peonage, basically.
Why didn't you buy a house in the 70s, Drew?
Why didn't I buy a house in the 70s? It's a good question. I was a wisp in the wind. So
I don't think they give out loans to wisps in the wind.
they don't allow them to sign deeds.
Maybe they should change that rule.
That could be the solution.
That's some kind of like dystopian future where it's like my grandchild 4 generations from now is signing the deed to this, which I am going to begin paying off. Well, I feel like that's like
in 20 years that'll be what the NDP and the Liberals will be putting. They'll say like, oh, well, we have new home buyer incentives for the preborn.
Oh my god, brutal. No, I feel like it's you really see like the state of the housing crisis with stuff with how like it's like how inheritance now is spoken about as like a lottery, right? For like the biggest wealth transfer, generational wealth transfer, right? They're speaking about in that terms of like people who would otherwise not be able to buy a house are just going to be given one, and that's going to be such a dividing factor, I think, going forward. And it's gonna, I don't know, of course, it's not just the generational difference. It's going to emphasize, of course, a class and financial.
No, it's going to create
difference.
huge social divisions and problems, I think.
Yeah,
in terms
unless,
of
of course, if you inherit one of those, throw some ragers, throw some parties. Maybe
that will bring us back together. Yeah.
Nah, it probably won't.
Invite all your renter friends over
Yeah.
to the rager at
That's
your
what you have to do with that privilege.
suburban home. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's all go to Markham. So this story, I think, coming back to the story about this fire, I think the thing I want to hit on with this fire is, to me, it rings in a similar sense with the fire that happened to Grenfell Tower in England, even the Notre Dame fire. Even there's another fire that happened to this like historic museum in Brazil, where these things are not apolitical, right? They're not just like, oh, unfortunate accidents. Accidents happen when there's a lack of preparedness, when there are not enough preventative measures, specifically for the Notre Dame and this museum fire in Brazil. Those happen because of austerity. That happened with the kind of like fire safety regulations and stuff, and that's how these disasters happen. That people are like are so woeful about. The Grenfell Tower, I think, is even a little more. What's the word I'm searching for? A little more malicious, or a little more. It's less. I think much less of an accident. It's much more of a flagrant.
Yeah, there's real pretty direct neglect going on.
Flagrant neglect of like the safety of these poor residents whose building was just like covered in this material that was very flammable.
Yeah.
And then the safety regulations were just kind of like
someone rolled the dice on their lives basically to like save a few bucks.
And that's sort of what happens. And to me, this Old Port fire is kind of rings in a very similar way. Of course, I think it's less. To a smaller scale, but still there's like something at the heart of that, which is I think the same as those ones, right? Where like there is a profit being incentivized, there is a lack of what we were saying, inspections, enforcement of these kinds of bylaws that we do have to sort of protect people from these kinds of things. It's this whole whirlwind of things that I think that really define Montreal in 2024, right? The increasing cost of living, a housing crisis, landlords who are being what's the proper word here? What's the polite word? I don't know. Neglectful. I'll continue to use that word.
Yeah.
Neglectful of the safety in their buildings, and who just want to turn a profit. And then these government institutions that are not quite protecting citizens because they are sort of kept to the whims of the landlord class.
I mean, I think that neglect isn't as direct as Grenfell, in the UK, but you can draw a pretty direct line from like the privatization and the commodification of housing and the sort of defunding of social housing in the early 90s by the Liberals and the Mulroney sort of outgoing Mulroney administration. You can draw a direct line from that to the situation that we're in now with these Airbnbs being chopped up and like housing being just generally treated as this sort of like profit maximizing commodity by everybody, by the landlord class basically. And also the sort of lack of housing stock means that people are squeezing more and more out of less and less because there's this sort of overarching demand. Like, I mean, Airbnb, I'm old enough to remember when Airbnb like seemed kind of promising in the sense that, if you have an extra room, who has an extra room anymore? They probably everybody has roommates, right? But but
I hear about places where they're renting spaces on beds. So you would share a bed with someone.
Yeah, I actually stayed in Airbnb. Like, I mean, I can sort of identify with the situation because I went to Los Angeles one time. Oh, yeah. Ended up staying in this Airbnb. It was like $20 a night. It was pretty grim. It was like just like a room full of bunk beds, and you're just literally just like there's like 25 different people snoring like within like a 5 foot radius. But
someone farts, you can't even point at the person because there's so many people there.
No, identifying the culprit is out of the question. Yeah. But sorry.
That's right.
Um, but in any case, the sort of
Condensing
the squeezing more and more out of less and less, it creates these dystopian sort of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go on to the next topic, the next story that I think is very definitive from Montreal in 2024. The anti-NATO protests.
Your tonality's reminiscent of
NATO been around 75 years now. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Consisting
and proud we are of all of them.
Of course. I mean, sometimes it annoys me that some of these countries are not even touching the Atlantic. I'm like, come on, guys, let's at least stick to the.
Yeah, it's true. They're talking about like having Japan.
Yeah. I'm like,
join NATO.
Get out of here.
I mean, it's north, but Atlantic. I think we can definitively say that Japan's not the Atlantic.
Under no circumstance.
Yeah.
Turkey's
a stretch already. So
I mean, that's, to me, it's, guys, come on. I'm saying let's kick some of these countries out, you know. But there was this big anti-NATO protest happening in Montreal, and
so you had about 1,500 people saying no to NATO, expressing solidarity with Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Both of those positions, not new ones, not necessarily.
Nothing particularly novel, but I think what is novel is that it is how much it sort of struck a nerve with the sort of global elite, who I think because of the Ukraine war, and I think I would hope anyway because of NATO's previous record of bombing the former Yugoslavia, of invading Afghanistan and occupying it for a long time, and of conducting an absolutely disastrous regime change operation in Libya, just to name a few recent highlights.
Perhaps the question people are wondering is NATO for good? Do we want to be contributing to that? Perhaps.
Well, this is a question that doesn't get asked very often, and so it was, it's refreshing to have people ask it, in the streets and loudly.
I guess there's some ways that people, take organizations like NATO, I guess, for granted, or assume that it's just kind of like, of course, this is something that we're going to provide. Of course, this is something that we support. And here we have a group of people in Montreal, I guess, bringing that to question, wondering, is this what we want?
And of course, the debate, I think, or the sort of falsely constrained or narrowly framed debate as centered on Ukraine, right? Like where you have, the Russian invasion, of course, and then you have that being provoked, arguably. I wouldn't want to open up that debate necessarily, but let's say some say that it was provoked.
There we go.
By the sort of loud noises that Ukraine was making about joining NATO.
Right, of course.
Which Russia had been pretty continuously saying was a red line, and had been expressing a lot of unhappiness about other countries on its borders joining NATO, but they were like, absolutely, you will not do that in Ukraine. And then there were a few coups d'états in Ukraine. There were a few different other things that happened, that, in any case, whether you want to talk about cause and effect or not, happened in the lead up to Russia invading Ukraine, and then you did have some people with like Russian flags, which obviously adds to pours fuel on the fire.
Some people with Russian flags where?
At the
anti-NATO protest?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're talking about 1,500 people, and there's like a few,
but
nonetheless,
they felt comfortable there.
They
were like, this is a spot.
And so of course the sort of discourse seizes on this. I mean, I don't think they even needed the Russian flags to seize on it, but they say, these are Russian dupes. They're like they're nominally pro peace, but really they're being fooled by the Russians into wanting peace. In any case, this reaction sort of got some kind of critical mass and became an international phenomenon of the Associated Press reporting on this, 1,500 person protest. It's like it's another it's another Friday in Montreal,
I
right?
know,
Like literally, that happens once every 2 weeks. If not more often.
And that's something we're proud of.
Absolutely. But for some reason, this is becomes a huge thing, and like the New York Post covers it, Reuters covers it, and Pierre Polyev covers it. So maybe we should watch the video before we get into it.
Yeah. So what Drew is mentioning here is referring to is a tweet by Pierre. When did he post it? He posted this November 23rd, 2024. This has 1 million views. Pierre Polyev on Twitter, on X rather, says Justin Trudeau refuses to condemn the anti-Semitic riots in Montreal. He has time to dance and do selfies, but he's too busy to condemn a violent Hamas takeover of our streets. Not worth the chaos. Let's check out this video. While Trudeau danced away, Montreal burned. Footages of fire. Trudeau dancing in the crowd. I think I was at the Taylor Swift show.
Yeah, that was Taylor Swift, yeah. It's amazing what a good backbeat can do to like make something feel ominous and threatening. The Conservatives really have a big sound library of like things that bring your heart rate up.
We can't go on like this. Trudeau is not worth the cost. Is that it? That's how it ends? No. Okay.
That's it.
All right, so what we just watched was a little video on X that sort of jumps between footage of Trudeau at this Taylor Swift show, just dancing, having fun, pretending like he's not the prime minister.
And then there's a few masked black bloc type protesters breaking the window of like a small like CIBC outlet downtown.
Yeah.
And just to round it out, they did throw some paint at some riot cops, and apparently they smashed a cop car as well, or two. I don't know.
I think so. What I heard, I didn't know about that. I haven't heard about the cop car stuff.
Okay.
I know there was.
It was claimed. It was claimed. Oh, a car fire. Okay.
There was a car on fire.
Oh.
That initially Montreal police said was caused by the protesters, but then there's divvy footage or photos of like SPVM tear gas canisters in the car.
Oopsie.
Ooh, bad aim. I mean, potentially we don't. I think nothing was sort of confirmed by any party so far, but clearly, I mean, this is like I think the whole point is.
I think what we have footage of is some paint hitting a few police officers and a bank window. Or two being broken.
These are new Hamas tactics.
Yeah, but Montreal was burning.
Yeah.
So this is what we need.
So okay, so I guess
I guess it literally is burning if you count the car.
Yeah. Montreal is burning, and the SPVM is doing it? ? But I don't think I don't think conservatives are going to be saying that.
Yeah, not a nuance that Pierre Polyev is going to be adding himself potentially, but
yeah, I don't think he's here to report on the situation on the ground in Montreal. I think this is clearly just about I guess raising some kind of conservative right-wing panic about disorder in the streets, about foreign perhaps interference.
Yeah.
Given the Russian dupes, given him calling these him calling this protest, specifically one section of this protest, a violent Hamas takeover of our streets, it's just completely overblowing.
But I think what's behind this is, if you look at what NATO is, it's basically like an international trade organization for arms dealers, right? Like
right. It guarantees income. It guarantees spending. So 2% of GDP on arms.
Yeah, so every NATO member is supposed to spend at least 2% of GDP it's a lot of money on arms, basically, and of course, who benefits from that? But mainly the U.S. But there's a strong contingent of sort of Canadian companies that are in there as well, and who are providing little parts and services and everything else for these big multi-billion-dollar arms deals that are sort of moving around transcontinentally, and obviously now need to be replenished because lives, like hundreds of thousands of human lives, are being thrown into the like meat grinder that is, and obviously billions of dollars worth of equipment is being thrown into the meat grinder that is Ukraine, with that's just leaving this hole of like human loss and environmental devastation and everything else, basically for the purpose of degrading Russia's capabilities. And it's not even clear that that's happening.
Right.
So I think there's a lot at stake for certainly the investor class in Canada. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the Globe and Mail they just did an editorial the other day is like, basically deriding like, oh, we don't want to like reduce the price of potato chips. We want to like have these substantial things. So they're like, oh, we need to take care of the housing crisis. They don't say how, of course. But then in the same breath, they're like, oh, and our military has degraded its capability. We clearly need to like upgrade it as we face global threats, right? Like, so they're just like, they're just so eager to get into new wars and to spend money on arms in any case.
Do you think that Pierre tweet about the Hamas takeover of Montreal sort of feeds into that?
I think that that's like the populist version, because like Hamas is like, I think for the average, certainly conservative voter or like potential conservative voter, a scary, you think of these like scary masked sort of Islamists.
Right.
So I think that and obviously you have the scary music and you have all this stuff. So I think he's trying to create like a brainstem level association between Justin Trudeau and like fear and chaos.
Right.
Like literally that's pretty much the goal of every conservative video, as far as I can tell. It's just like, and like I said, they have this sound library, this like, like 200. They went to like the music store and bought the catalog of like
the
ways
score to like that show 24.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just getting you your
The
like
heart rate up.
the heart rate up, and just absolutely the nervous system like in a heightened state of fear.
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah.
They want people watching these going, oh no, Trudeau's doing nothing about this.
Yeah, it's the Fox News playbook. And so of course you need a strong man in the form of Pierre Poilievre to save us. And it's to their credit, it's working very well. Is that going to like absolutely degrade our civic life and ability to meet our basic needs? Also
Most
true,
likely.
yes. But
the answer is yes.
But it's politically successful, unquestionably.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the point is, there's billions of dollars at stake in keeping NATO as this like mechanism of constantly increasing military spending. And fueling these industries, and of course that creates a feedback loop, right? Like more billions go into these industries, and then a percentage of that's going to go to lobbying, and that's going to create all these employees who are now like aligned in some way with this industry, and so then lobbyists can go and say, oh well, there's thousands of jobs in London, Ontario, or whatever it is, right? That are going to be at risk if you don't keep increasing this, and we can deliver more jobs to your constituency, and like so you get these feedback loops of political power through money and people that are constantly being created, and of course if you can add war in there and add the threat of Russia and invading the far north of Canada or whatever you're worried about, then you can stoke that even more, and you create that feedback loop, and
you get that public consent for that, and it just kind of keeps growing.
Yeah, absolutely, and it obviously just with almost like just absolutely negative social value. Yeah. If you look at the actual record of Canada's armed forces and sort of the kinds of things that go on there in terms of like just rampant sexual assault and like harassment and like abuses of power,
right?
Like,
the actual social footprint they leave in these places.
Exactly. And so that's you're basically just saying, okay, let's sign us up for more of that.
Yeah. So far Liberals have been kind of not really meeting that 2% target. I think we were talking briefly about Trump sort of seeming to strong arm Canada, other NATO countries into actually spending that 2% target.
Yeah, that's very much Trump's, MO is, he's like, well, the U.S. is footing the bill for all these wars. So
And
you
I was
guys
like,
have
what
to,
if you didn't?
you guys have to, yeah, exactly. Right?
What if instead you stop spending that?
What if instead of Germany spending 2%, because Germany mobilizing its resources to create a military industrial complex. I mean that's never really gone awry in history, has it? But instead of getting Germany to increase its GDP spend on war, like you could have the U.S. reduce it. But yeah, I mean he's constantly playing these tricks. He's saying today that we have to. That Canada should become the 51st state, and just really poking us in the soft underbelly of our collective national ego.
Yeah.
But it's clearly doing the trick. But what's interesting is the sort of dance between Trump sort of saying, "Oh, you guys need to spend more on GDP," and then all the investor class in Canada being like, yes, we do need to spend more, So the Globe and Mail editorial decrying the GST, rebate, the tax holiday during the winter holiday, at the same time as it's saying, oh, we need to spend more on the military, and then Chrystia Freeland appealing very directly to that and resigning in a very high profile way, saying, oh, we need to be we need to spend less money on gimmicks, and more money, the quiet part, not quite out loud, but I think everyone knows what she has in mind, right? To the extent that she's aligned with Canada's establishment.
Right, of course, yeah. It's interesting. All this from just regular riots in Montreal. Not even riots, I think, well, maybe riots.
Mm-hmm.
All this stemming from these regular protests here in Montreal. I'm kind of,
but I think the coverage has been tilted toward stoking the anxieties. I mean, they're not. I think they're kind of caught between wanting to suppress anti-NATO sentiment, because I think we were looking at the poll numbers earlier. There's 25% of people in Canada who oppose NATO. I don't have any idea who they are.
yeah.
It's actually one of the lowest opposition rates in the sort of among NATO.
This is
numbers.
a report from the Pew Research Center, released July 2nd, 2024. This is a list of
Poland apparently has only 5%. There's a 91% approval rate, but
they love NATO in Poland.
But yeah, other than the Netherlands and Sweden and the UK, Canada's definitely up there with in terms of the level of support. That said, I think the media is not interested in fueling that, but they are interested in using threatening looking protest in Montreal to stoke the anxieties of a particular segment of the population, who is going to, the sort of elites who are going to then be oh no, there's opposition to NATO. We need to
we need to do something.
We need to NATO harder, basically.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we're looking at, right?
Yeah. What do you think about this bit about
riots?
where Pierce calls the riots anti-Semitic?
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's just anything that expresses support of Palestine is just their go-to, right? I mean, it's just shameless. But we know where Pierre Poilievre stands on this. I think.
Course, yeah.
But Trudeau, I think, did the same thing. I think he they're in lockstep on that, right? Trudeau was also calling it anti-Semitic, as I recall. Yeah. Except that he also managed to fit in a Taylor Swift concert and some dance moves. So I think Trudeau wins this round in the sense that he's more versatile. He can call protesters anti-Semitic and have a good time.
Of course.
Pierre Poilievre's just stewing. He's just seething, seething and posting scary videos.
Damn.
With.
Yeah, you scroll down on that tweet, you see just people actually at the scene of the crime, as it were.
Exactly.
Just barely any damage. The street is fine. There's a couple.
Not a burn mark in sight.
Couple windows are broken, which is
there's some plywood. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I guess little. So I guess just to summarize what you're saying, you feel these kinds of protests in Montreal, which are pretty bog standard of being sort of against NATO, pro-Palestine, questioning just outright militarism in Canada. These protests, which are very regular, very just regularly attended.
And
This
from
one time.
given NATO's record, I would say like
Fairly.
very welcome. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. This fair criticism of NATO, this fair questioning of NATO. This one instance, I guess, was blown out of proportion because it was sort of to kind of spur on this elite class of people who might be sort of in favor of increasing spending towards NATO, in favor of what Trump is saying about.
Well, it's never clear why it's covered, but yeah, I think
That's the
I think there's a clear anxiety there that and which I think journalists and editors more importantly of these sort of big international newswire services perceive and correctly and sort of cater to, but then obviously there's a way that coverage gets used to sort of mobilize the sort of counter reaction to any kind of nascent anti-NATO sentiment. And it used to be the case that like calling for the withdrawal of NATO was like a kind of an NDP position, obviously one that's derided and ridiculed, but nonetheless like something that
Every now and then
social democratic politicians would like stand up in parliament and talk about every once in a while. And that's not the game plan at the moment, as far as I can tell.
You have some people
all
who
party
call
consensus.
For it. Yeah, some people who call for it. You'll find some candidates who call for it, but otherwise the main position of the party is absolutely in support of it. Yeah, I remember being at it was a candidate for NDG Westmount back in like 2019 who was speaking on NATO, and he was actually like, it's time for Canada to withdraw, and I was like, that's surprising.
Was that Bill Sloan?
It was Franklin Gertler.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was like, all right, interesting. Interesting that someone's actually saying this, but yeah, it's far from an average opinion, I guess,
it doesn't
across.
happen very often.
Yeah.
But it's maybe it'll happen more if I don't know.
Some discussion,
if
conversation is moved along about NATO.
Yeah, if movements find a way to like not self-marginalize and create a big tent and gain some momentum and have incisive, targeted sort of interventions, then stranger things could happen. I think there's a lot of
big ask.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's interesting, I think, to note is just that in Canada and the U.S., like the opposition to NATO is coming from the right. And it's not particularly principled. I don't think you're going to hear any mention of Afghanistan or Libya.
No, it comes from this more isolationist kind of like tendency.
It's like we need to like stop wasting money on this thing. And people feel like the priority isn't them. And so it's like this sort of selfish contraction, which I don't know. I mean, it's not one I completely disagree with, but
maybe for different reasons.
But there's not a very prominent left-wing version of that because there's no electoral voice for it.
Right. No, totally fair. Speaking of electoral voices.
Absolutely. Let's speak of electoral voices.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point to jump onto our next topic of the Montreal by-election that happened back in September. This is, like I said before, the riding of LaSalle-Aymar-Verdun. You had MP David Lametti, who used to be the Justice Minister, resigning and opening up his seat for whoever wants it. And a lot of people wanted it. We got 91 candidates on the ballot. You're saying this was a part of a little protest movement?
Yeah, there's an electoral reform protest movement that basically says they're just going to put like 100 candidates on the ballot. And so you have these like absurdly long ballots that people have to fill out and like search around for the name they want to vote for. And like it caused like lineups and people were getting angry. I had a friend texting me from like one of the lineups, and she was like, "What is going on? Like, what is this?" And so I looked it up. Yeah, it's I think they've done it in a few different by-elections, and it basically just causes chaos at the polling stations. And I think they're gonna like make some kind of like slight change to the regulations that makes it harder to do it, and then it's gonna stop, and it will have accomplished whatever it accomplished. I don't know.
Democracy.
Yeah, probably not the thing that's going to force Justin Trudeau to like do electoral reform.
Yeah.
And nothing will convince Pierre Poilievre to do electoral reform because the Conservative Party will never have another majority ever again.
Yeah.
If we have electoral reform.
Yeah. They're completely blown out the water.
But just as a as a quick aside, I do think electoral reform is the one thing that Justin Trudeau could do to stop Pierre Poilievre from having a supermajority of parliament.
Take the hint, Justin.
Yeah,
Take the
Justin, if you're listening, no, but
Hey, what do you mean? No, he could be maybe a staffer. He gave up. He was like, no way. I'm like, there's some chance.
if somebody knows, if you see him in the street,
grab him.
No, but the main point is, I think what you're just saying is that I feel like the media has been sort of on sort of liberal death watch for well over a year at this point.
His approval ratings are like so low. Trudeau mania is over.
Am I recalling correctly that the one in Toronto happened right before LaSalle?
It happened a few months before. Yeah.
Right, so it happened before, and they were like, well, if we lose this like central Toronto stronghold that's been liberal for like, I don't know, 30 years.
Time immemorial.
Yeah, basically time immemorial. Then at that point, Justin Trudeau will be in trouble. And they lost it to the Conservatives. And then Justin Trudeau didn't do anything. So we moved on to the next by-election. Lo and behold, there's the one in Montreal. And again, the Liberal, they had a 10,000 vote margin last time, like literally double anyone else's vote count when it was David Lametti was running in the 2021 election. And lo and behold, a few short years later, that margin was completely erased, and it was basically a tight three-way race. So you had the NDP contending and coming in second, and the Bloc sort of ran away with it with a margin of a few hundred votes.
The NDP second? I feel like the NDP might have been third in that.
I could be misremembering that. But in any case, you had a tight three-way race, and the Bloc was able to sort of pull it out of
NDP finished in third.
Pull it out of the fire,
Bloc, Liberals, NDP.
But with a margin of a few hundred votes.
So it's so close, It was a three-way race, like you're saying,
So in any case, you have the Liberals just dropping, like a stone, regardless of who benefits ultimately from it. And then of course, to continue the very nuanced pattern recognition that we can pull out of the sea of data in front of us.
Okay, no longer red.
There was a by-election yesterday in Langley, BC, and the Liberals again dropped like a stone, and the Conservatives got in. So
gravity wins.
Things are not boding well, shall we say, for the Liberals.
Yeah, I think so. The question, I think, is I guess how much they're going to be able to stop these losses, how badly they're going to be, how low will they go. In terms of Montreal, it was still a close second for them, and that's where I think it gets interesting for the island of Montreal. So much of Montreal being this of course this urban center, specifically being the home of a lot of these liberal MPs and cabinet ministers since their elections. I think Montreal is going to be much harder for the Liberals than the last time around. Because I think you have conservatives who are sort of we were speaking about this before, but you have conservatives like Pierre, who's doing actively campaigning on the island, specifically in the West Island,
drawing a crowd of thousands.
At this West Island mall, right? It shows that even the West Island, which is I think of the West Island as just the liberal castle, the liberal fortress, right?
Absolutely,
and even there. There's signs of their support
the barbarians are at the gates. Absolutely. The Castle West Island. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The mega centre. The mega centre has fallen.
Yeah. They're ringing the bells. They're lighting the fires.
Yeah. But Pierre Poilievre's rally the other day. I guess last week was it?
Friday. It was on Friday.
Was at the Mega Centre de Source. In the West Island.
Yeah. And drew a crowd of thousands. He's been actively campaigning at different places in TMR. In Côte Saint-Luc, sort of of course, a more I'll say a suburban kind of crowd, of course, naturally, suburban Anglo, and apparently they must see some opportunity there, because otherwise why would they rally so hard there?
And then just the other day you have or I think it was yesterday even, Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, who was, of course, flirting with the possibility of jumping to the Conservatives and then decided to stay Liberal. But he's condemning
It's calling Trudeau to resign.
Justin Trudeau, and of course he's on the everything pro-Palestine is anti-Semitic bandwagon as well.
Yes, yeah, he is kind of the king of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, I think this is sort of an interesting subplot in this by-election. Again, I think a sign of a bigger times. Normally a by-election wouldn't be very remarkable, but this one had a few different features to it. One of which was that some of the, and maybe we can pull up the tweet, but there was a sort of non-affiliated third-party group that put up signs all over the riding.
Officially registered as well?
Officially registered, non-affiliated third party. They crossed all their T's and dotted their I's when it came to the... and so they have these signs here that says, "Your taxes fund genocide in Gaza."
Yeah.
And they have basically a suitcase full of banknotes that are sort of turning into bombs. And then you have a maple leaf literally turning into bombs. Subtle yet poignant.
And Canadian support for genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. So they plastered these all. I think this crew of local activists got out early in the morning and they just like covered all the, a lot of the key sort of light poles, basically, and telephone poles and everything in the riding. And so we really took up a lot of space, and that's created a bit of a problem. And so, lo and behold, that I think with maybe the same night, if not like within a few days, some people started to go out at night and take all these posters down.
Well, just some people.
Not just some people.
City workers.
The city workers.
The city sent people taking these signs
there was
down.
Surveillance camera footage or camera footage in any case that basically showed like a city vehicle pulling up to one of these light poles and like taking down these signs, these pro-Palestine signs, and like taking them away in the city vehicle. And the city had actually gotten in trouble for this in the past. Yeah. Like there was a communist candidate, Bill Sloan, who ran in Westmount and caused a lot of consternation when he put up some anti-imperialist signs, including a bunch of pro-Palestine signs in the riding, and the city took them down as well, and had to pay like thousands of dollars in fines to his campaign, I believe. And so I think there was some hope that this would be a source of fundraising for this activist group. The fact that the city had taken down all these signs.
Yeah. Time for them to pay out.
But quite a brazen I don't know, assault on basic democratic functioning, right? Like, not just freedom of speech, but like regulated political speech. That is.
They're going through the proper channels. They're getting registered.
It's a federal offense to take
federally protected.
If you're, it's no joke if you like get caught vandalizing like a
candidate poster.
A candidate's poster. Not that I would know anything about that myself, but
look me in the eye and say, I'm just kidding.
but if you do, it's a federal offense. It's definitely protected. But in this case, they seem to be just brazenly.
It's
intervening.
incredible that these signs which are put up, and that the city has been in trouble for before, that they still try to continue to take these down. Like I wonder, what do you think is behind? Like, what do you think is the rationale behind that? Do they just not recognize things that are pro-Palestinian as stuff that deserves to be up? Do they see it as like, I guess as almost like even though that these are officially put up, do they see it as a sort of like
it's honestly
vandalism?
Baffling because it's like, rule of law is the order of the day, like at all other times. So you'd think
you would expect city administrators or people to be like, oh, you know what, game.
Maybe they turn a blind eye when like some Zionists come and take them down, but they just like they're pulling up in a city vehicle and literally taking away the property of these groups. It's wild. Really remarkable. As a sort of a tertiary aside, the Liberal candidate's
of course
name happened to be, who of course is completely anti-Palestine, but was Laura Palestini. and I looked it up because I was super curious. Like, how did they find somebody whose like last name is Palestini?
Yeah.
And apparently, this is like a potentially of Italian origin or maybe Portuguese. But in either case, it refers to somebody who made a pilgrimage to the sort of Middle East or Palestine specifically during the Crusades.
Uh-oh.
And so came back and was sort of given this affectionately, I guess, given this moniker
Right.
Palestini, and this has sort of been passed down through the generations since the Crusades. So anyway,
You think any city worker was taking
history at work here?
Yeah. There's
Historical forces beyond
there's
beyond
a lot
us.
there's a lot of stuff going on. Do you think the city workers were taking down her signs? You think they would read that and they were like, hey, what the heck? We can't have this one up either.
I have to say that I was in the riding on election day, and I did see a lot of her signs still up. So my guess is that they did not.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean,
I didn't see any of those though. These ones were definitely long gone when I visited.
Yeah, it seems like they had quite the operation. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because this is so these groups have been popping up throughout a lot of the ridings across Canada. Because it's PYM, who we've covered so often here. They have this concerted effort to create sort of like parallel groups in every riding to sort of challenge and pressure these MPs, right? And this is one of those groups that started up in La Salle, Verdun, ML to pressure the MP there. And well, of course, like they have the foresight to be like, all right, so we want to do this officially. We want to get registered. No. It's this really like concerted, organized effort. And here they are. I don't know, like getting their stuff taken down by the city is just incredible. And then of course, people like I mean, this tweet we're looking at is from the mayor of Hampstead, whose tweet goes, "Once again, the streets of Montreal bear the scars of hate propaganda. Glaring symptom of Valerie Plante's failure to uphold the rule of law. Mayor Plante, it's time to take a stand and restore order in our city." I do love how.
I mean, and this is the, if I'm recalling correctly, this is the mayor who banned, who was going to prosecute people for taking down posters showing like pictures of like hostages.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
From Israeli
something
hostages.
Like $5,000 if you're found defacing
so he's like very actively like cracking down on the removal of posters that are about that are pro-Israeli basically. But then obviously just literally calling for these things to be taken down, which like apparently the city obliged him, and for some reason I think upholding the rule of law apparently means abrogating the free speech of people who are in solidarity with Palestine. I'm curious.
In a word, concerning.
Somewhat concerning, certainly. Yeah.
Anyways, this is all happening in this by-election.
We have concerns.
I mean, I guess to project this onto the future, it's going to be interesting seeing how Palestine plays a part in federal elections coming up. If it continues to hold the weight it does, which I'm sure it will, as PYM and these riding groups are very organized. We'll see if future posters gets taken down by the city, right? Because I mean, like a by-election is always like, it's like, of course, on one hand, it's like sort of a test for these for the parties. It's like this sort of forecast for what potential future lay ahead. But I think, like I'm saying again, it's a test for the parties, but also these campaign groups, right? And so now this campaign group knows that like, the city might like. I mean, maybe the city won't be taking them down again once they're like actually like full throttle ahead with a nationwide federal election. But yeah, I mean, I do really think there's a lot of things at play here, and that were at play at least in this by-election that I'm sure we'll see pop up again during the federal ones. The main ones being liberal loss, Palestine being perhaps front and center for a lot of campaigners, and Bloc Renaissance. We didn't touch.
No, I mean the liberal collapse is very interesting, and I think the NDP sees it as like an opportunity to sort of replicate the sort of Jack Layton official opposition of 2011. It remains to be seen if they can do that, but certainly if the Liberals implode completely, then I guess there's a chance.
It's a hard thing to recreate something that sort of happened without them preparing for it.
the orange wave.
Drew's talking about the orange wave, where we had like something like 50 to 54 seats in Quebec just completely turn orange towards the NDP. Of course, you had lots of people who were elected for the NDP who had never stepped foot in the riding. There's a few of them at least, and maybe not a lot of them, but
one of them was in Las Vegas. Turned out to be a pretty good MP.
Because Ruth Ellen Brossoit, I believe, who represents a northern regional riding. That story is hilarious to me. Just being in Vegas,
highly amusing. Yeah.
what
I mean, just like a working class like person who's like booked her vacation and
she's like, I'm not gonna win
like,
this.
I'm not gonna cancel my vacation. It's just because of an election.
And then just at the casino, like seeing the news and just spit take with the coffee.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyways, we'll see.
Spilling your casino chips. Yeah.
I mean, in Quebec, it's like I think a liberal loss is not always. In Quebec, I love Quebec for how much the voters swing here, or not just one voter, because it's more about these different like blocks, right? Usually a liberal loss is never a promise for the NDP in Quebec. At times it's been like in the 90s, we were saying it's been the bloc has been the opposition. Of course, in 2011, famously, Quebec became almost completely orange for the NDP.
Well, if there's anybody who can like be unpredictable in an election, it's Quebec. Like nobody else does. Nobody does it quite like Quebec.
I know.
In that respect.
God bless this province.
Yeah.
I do love it because it's like the thing I love about it is like it's like there's I love the lack of political loyalty.
Yeah.
Of just kind of like who's gonna do me best? Who's gonna represent me best? Right.
Yeah.
And of course you have the bloc as I guess a stalwart class, a favorite of province, naturally being a party that says they're gonna represent the province. So naturally people in the province are gonna be like, you guys. And we kind of see that happening again in Verdun, Villemort, LaSalle. I mixed up the order of that, but you see, the bloc won with their candidate Louis-Philippe Sauvé.
Yeah,
and I'm expecting to see.
As far as I can tell, just a complete party functionary, just like a staffer, worked for a think tank who's like bloc adjacent, like just like a not an interesting
called up from the depths.
Shall we say not an interesting person, but like a total loyal MP. Clearly.
Clear.
Long-time party operative.
And just kind of called up to the ranks. It's like it's his time to shine.
But yeah, I mean the bloc is just like it's just a parking lot, and Quebecers are basically just like, well, if there's nothing better on offer, if I'm not excited about anything, I'll just park my vote over here, and I'm not gonna mess around with your.
I think there's some people who hold that in kind of contempt, or they kind of don't understand it, or they think that Quebecers are throwing their votes away. And to those people specifically, I think the bloc is being. I think their existence, I think, is politically a smart one, because I think there's aside from like any whatever your opinions are on like independence.
I mean, I think people are mostly just offended by independence and the constant. Constant threat of a referendum. Yeah.
Of course, and we're trying to break through that. I think. Well, I mean, referendum is sort of back on the.
I mean, it's gonna. It looks like the
90s are back.
The 90s are absolutely back. Back.
But not with rental prices, unfortunately. But yeah, no. The thing with the bloc, it's like they sort of like it's this. Like in the
that's what we need is 90s rents to come back. $200 for an apartment. Absolutely.
If a referendum will bring back that kind of rent, I'm listening. I'm listening. I'm not saying yes, but I'm listening. Let's have the conversation. No, it's like the bloc is smart about this because it's like in the Westminster system, right, that we use, it's designed to be these regional parties, right? Mm-hmm. And like the bloc is the actual one that actually follows through with that and then gets the benefit from it in terms of like
absolutely
proportion of like national votes to actual like representation in parliament, right? Mm-hmm. And like other parties are just struggling to like spread across this like massive like landmass that is Canada. Meanwhile, the bloc is able to kind of condense their efforts into this one region. I think they get the benefit from it. Of course, I mean, well, we'll see. Montreal is not necessarily Montreal hasn't been too bloc friendly in a while, I was saying they do sort of represent a background radiation that is always there, always consistent between elections. And if the liberal tide descends, as I'm expecting it will, then what you will see is perhaps a bloc, that bloc voter base that is always steadily there. But I don't know. We'll see. I
mean, I think the risk of the bloc is that, like, historically in Canada, like, you can't win a majority without seats in Quebec. Yeah. But I think you can now. Like, just the way the demographics are changing and the sort of number of seats proliferating out west. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it hasn't really happened. like it almost happened with the Conservatives. Like they had like a couple seats in Quebec, so it was enough for them to sort of have that like legitimacy.
Foothold, yeah.
But there's totally a scenario where Quebec gets like completely shut out. Probably not this round. It's pretty clear that the Conservatives are going to stomp in at least a number of Quebec ridings. But I think people would say that the sort of that's the risk of sort of regional parties. You don't get to participate in government.
Because you're shut out
but
by
Quebec's
whatever.
just big enough that it doesn't ever quite happen that way. Yeah,
A real threat. Shall we continue on
let's do that.
electoralism? So on a local front, we love local news.
We do love local news, absolutely.
Local, woo!
We love local civic news.
We love local civic news specifically and especially. Generally, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on the city front, on the municipal front.
It is neglected by the progressive forces.
We're looking at you, progressive forces. Consider the municipal front.
I'd like to speak now to the progressive forces.
Is the progressive forces in the room with us right now?
I am gonna have to take a rain check on answering that one.
Nothing under the table.
Yeah, I don't see them.
One of the big news items, I think, for Montreal for 2024 is Valérie Plante, our mayor, our green mayor, announcing that she is no longer...
She does love to wear a green jacket.
We're looking at like a photo of her and she's in green, reminding us the color of gentrification. We are talking about Valérie Plante's announcement that she is no longer seeking re-election for next year's municipal race, which is set for, I believe, end of November 2025. She's doing this, of course, in advance, giving her party a year to get their shit together, to let the brave, let the strong come out and lay claim to my throne. She said,
"Survival of the fittest." I think it was her direct quote. Yeah.
yeah.
No, it was not her direct quote. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a good opportunity, of course, to think about her tenure as mayor since winning the seat for the first time in 2017, becoming Montreal's first female mayor, changing the direction of the city, I think, away from the Codels and Applebombs of the past. And I think this is one of the interesting things where you really see you see a representation of her tenure as mayor. You see it in the streets. You see the way the city.
Absolutely, it's a physical mark that's left on the city. Absolutely, there's no question about that.
Yeah.
So in terms of legacy, I would say like the city is in terms of urban design specifically, I'd be very very specific, because architecturally it has declined. But
you're not a fan of the new styles of condos.
the forest of condos is saying this is really just a unique Montreal period piece.
Yeah, exactly.
In 100 years, we'll look at the forest of condos in Griffintown, and we'll just be like, wow,
beautiful.
Just love this like period architecture. No, that is not part of her legacy. But certainly bike lanes, certainly kind of nice looking things, murals, lots of murals,
bigger sidewalks.
I just want to reiterate my position on murals and bike lanes. There needs to be a moratorium until rent starts to decrease. But regardless of what my opinions are, I think the city is a more superficially convivial place, shall we say?
Sure.
And
easy on the eyes.
Yeah. Lots more opportunities for biking, lots more opportunities for pedestrians. And probably to the benefit of some of the commercial interests.
Of course. Well, 2 episodes ago, I had Katia Loinez on from the Breach. We spoke briefly on some, I guess, appraisal of her tenure, right? And you have some wins, of course, like these increased bike lanes, active transportation, they call it. It's a little more accessible. It's a little more readily available. Big C's throughout the year, There is, of course, the thing of these things increasing property values, of course, for the class of landowners who essentially are the main source of funding for these for municipal politics, right? So that's sort of the dance with the landowning devil that municipal politicians must play with.
The homeowners association.
Of course, the business lobbies and all the complaints they have.
Yeah,
over
absolutely.
how things are run.
And of course, I think a big part of the legacy is the massive increase in the police budget.
Yes.
At the expense of, and Valerie Plante is somebody who I think in her heart wants to build a lot more social housing, but just couldn't quite bring herself to like spend any political capital to like do that on any kind of scale beyond. I mean, certainly probably did it a little more than Coderre would have. Probably spent a little more on public transportation than Coderre would have.
Of course, there's a lot more metro stations are now. A lot of them have been kind of like renovated, completely redesigned.
Yeah.
There's a lot more of them that are accessible to people who are of reduced mobility, right? And I think that those are incredible wins.
They did do the tarif social, but also increased metro. Did they do the tarif social? As far as I know, they did.
What was that?
Where there's like
It
a
should be free.
reduced rate for
People over 65.
Yeah.
That's
and youth as well. Maybe.
Yeah.
But
there.
but obviously increased metro fares
For everyone else.
So yeah, a mixed bag. The way I would sort of summarize it is to say like, it's like progressive measures, but without the progressive movements. And so you are pretty much alienating any kind of activist base. Like you're actively, like you're making it very hard for them to like be enthusiastic. They might begrudgingly vote for you. They might begrudgingly, they might even like tactically volunteer for a campaign. But when you increase the police budget by $70 million, in a single year, and like that is like looming over the housing budget, the whole housing budget, just the increase, then something is amiss. And what you've basically done is said like, okay, we're going to go for like the security wanting, property value, protecting sort of interests, and counting on them, that constituency to basically turn out to vote for you. So you have the bike lanes that increase the property values. You have the increased police presence that supposedly makes people feel safer.
Right.
Certain people anyway. You have all these things that are sort of dedicated to like protecting these private investments. But then you're sort of deprioritizing everything else while continuing to use that rhetoric at all the time and continuing probably to have like, honestly, she's probably in her heart a progressive person, but didn't find a way to like actualize that in a way that built up her political power. Like did not make it saw like progressive policy as something that's like nice to do when you can.
Right.
But then the game of political power is being sort of determined by probably some advisors who are telling her, oh yeah, we have to get into the business lobby. You have to deal with homeowners. You have to turn out this constituency. These people are not serious. They won't vote. Yeah. And so you have a majority of the city, renters, who are sort of left out in the cold. And you're going to see those people probably turn out if they turn out at all for Projet, it's probably turn out in smaller numbers, unless there can be somebody who doesn't see progressive politics as an accoutrement and a personal value.
That's the main course.
But sees it as something that you can hook into a constituency, which can then build your political power. So that I think connecting those two things is what has been clearly missing from Valerie Plante's tenure as mayor, which is definitely a unique and significant change from previous administrations, as you said. So yeah, I think that's my take on her legacy.
No, I think it's totally fair. I think it's this movement towards something. It gestures towards this kind of like municipal future that we kind of desire, right? Of like, these things are like vaguely progressive. Is this what she kind of does? But then of course there's the actual like it's unsatisfying. It's like you don't get the full the full actual kind of like
well, it's
agitating the full kind of.
You take all the aesthetics of progressivism, and you pair it with, basically measures that drastically increase inequality and make life significantly more difficult for, like, certainly a plurality and maybe a majority of probably a majority of people who live in Montreal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the tough thing, right? Like we were talking about, like before we talk about the Langley election, which had like something like, was it like a 16% turnout? That's something like low voter turnout is something that's so much the norm, right, for these municipal elections, right? And so the people that, of course, like you're referring to, that these advisors are going to say, you need to count on these people. You need to make sure they turn out because they can be relied upon turning out, is going to be that kind of class of people who are landowning, part of homeowners associations, business lobbies, merchant associations. The people who do turn up for municipal elections because those municipal laws, municipal policy affects them the most. Yeah.
So as we look at the sort of, slate of candidates that's looking to replace Valérie Plante, and somebody, the person who's selected will have like a decent shot of becoming the next mayor of Montreal, despite, Projet having sort of burned some political capital. As we look at those candidacies and watch the video in a second, what I'll be looking for is any hint that this person understands the difference between like progressive aesthetics and progressive politics and base building,
mobilizing, right.
Which, there's no indication of with.
Let's get into this video. Who's running? This video is titled "Who's Running to Replace Valérie Plante in the 2025 Montreal mayoral race." This is posted by CBC. Was it 5 days ago? Let's get into this.
To become the next mayor of Montreal is taking shape. With the election less than a year away, parties are getting ready to pick new leaders, but there's a void to fill at Projet Montréal after Mayor Valérie Plante announced she would not run again. But will candidates carry on her legacy? Luc Rabouin announced he plans to throw his hat into the ring. Since he was elected in 2019, he's been a key member of the city's executive committee. He plans to revitalize the city's East End and public transit services.
In terms of vision and values, we are very at the same place, me and Valérie Plante. So it's a certain form of continuity, of course.
Projet Montréal launched its call for candidates this week. The mayor of Côte-d'Ivoire.
So we just saw Luc Rabouin there, a classic Projet Montréal figure.
He's actually a relatively recent addition. I'm not sure what he's doing before he became borough mayor, but he's the one who took over for, I'm going to mess this up, his name, Luc Ferrandez.
Yes,
who was the borough mayor in the Plateau. And so then Luc Rabouin sort of stepped in and then, I think was very successful in the last election. But this is like ground zero for Projet Montréal support is the Plateau, absolutely. So, so in some ways not surprising, but a very, very secure and politically successful, candidate, and I think somebody with some progressive values, but also who's gonna, who plays the game. I mean, obviously he's not an outsider at all. He's he's the chair of the executive committee of the city. I always forget the proper name, but the people who make the decisions. He's the one sort of managing those folks. So somebody who I think very much in the mold of a Valérie Plante sort of probably sees the sort of possibilities as like, okay, we got to spend some political capital to get this progressive thing, but isn't going to like change the mobilization model,
right?
And as a result, probably isn't going to do very much beyond the kinds of things that Valérie Plante was able to do, which is to say that inequality will continue to increase under his watch. That would be my sort of blanket assessment, which isn't to say that there's not a lot of he could be a good person to sort of for movements to sort of push, but to count on him doing anything on his own I think is probably
Unlikely.
a little bit of a step too far.
Yeah, he does seem to be. I mean, like in the video, he was saying directly that he's kind of represents continuity, right, with this administration. I think it's to be expected. One thing I would expect from him a little more if he does kind of win this nomination and then goes on to win the mayoral race is, I think, more action on Airbnbs, because you saw a lot of the kind of like pilot projects of inspecting and sort of banning Airbnbs and really being tight on them happening in his borough and sort of under his jurisdiction. I do expect that to sort of potentially expand with a mayoral.
Yeah, he does strike me as somebody who's like wonky enough personally, and sort of familiar with the inner workings of the city enough to like know how the rubber meets the road in terms of the regs, the regulations, and how ways that the city can effectively exercise power, and ways that, because when you're a municipal politician, you have to, it's not just, oh, I made a decision and now it's a decision. It's like, no, I made a decision and now it has to filter through the bureaucracy, and then that has to become something that actually works on the ground. And then, I have to like evade the attacks from like the business community, from the real estate developers, from like all the different constituencies that are going to get pissed off about this. And I have to like field all these, inane sort of like ultimately probably irrelevant sort of requests
Voices,
from people who are like, oh, there's a garbage outside my house and the municipal council is to blame, like these are the kinds of things that you're navigating and then finding ways to like get concrete stuff done that ultimately has a progressive effect. So in terms of the actual knowledge of how to do that, I think Rabouin is probably, my guess is one of the more skilled.
Navigating
how he will use it if he's a mayor of Montreal is a completely other question. I have no idea. But
still pretty far ahead. Let's continue with this video.
Côte-des-Neiges NDG Gracia Kasoki-Katawa has spoken publicly about her interest in joining the race, but has not made an official announcement. Members will cast their vote for leader in March. But in a statement, Projet Montréal says only one person has completed all the necessary paperwork. It's the organization's former president, Gedwig Bernier. Bernier has never been elected, preferring to work behind the scenes.
I feel like the underdogs, for sure. I cannot see myself otherwise. And be involved in community organizations, associations, and so on. I have a deep network in Montreal.
Meanwhile, the opposition at City Hall is struggling to attract candidates.
So we just saw two potential candidates there: the borough mayor of Côte-des-Neiges NDG and the former party president of Projet Montréal.
Yeah, so you have Katawa, who's actually a former nurse, if I understand correctly, and also worked for a nurses' union, and I think was briefly worked for the STM as well. So definitely somebody who really comes from the public sector,
right? Yeah.
In terms of how she would run things, I don't have a good sense of it. But she's the current borough mayor of Côte-des-Neiges. So
she was elected very recently too.
Yeah. So the person who was brought in to succeed Sue Montgomery, who was unceremoniously turfed by our illustrious leader, Valérie Plante. That's definitely one of her more minor legacy pieces, but consequential, and nonetheless, the party under her watch sort of basically kicked out two borough mayors who were not seen to be loyal enough. So you had Juliana Fumagalli, who I full disclosure, worked with a bit on her campaign in VSP, Villeray Saint-Michel, Parc Extension, and then you had Sue Montgomery in Côte-des-Neiges NDG, who was also elected in the same cycle, and they were both basically forced out, not just of the party, but of the party in any case, and attempted to be forced out of office. And Sue Montgomery was able to sue, I think, sued Valérie Plante specifically for some hundreds of thousands of dollars and won. So an interesting bit of background there, but Katawa was the person who was sort of
replaced her.
Replaced. So clearly somebody. I'm sure that reflected the confidence of the PM Projet Montréal bureaucrats, the party apparatchiks, if you will, in her loyalty and willing to like play ball with what their priorities are. So it's hard to draw any real conclusions, but
she's relatively new, so I think it's hard to
a team player.
Yeah. That's a good sense of it. Yeah, for what she's done. And then of course this the party president.
Yeah, so he's the
Ludwig.
party president, and it's interesting. I mean, all I can say about him is that he filled out his paperwork. Within 2 hours of the deadline, he had it all filled out and ready to go. So he's keen in any case.
Yeah. I think he's so far of the ones that are shown in the video, the only one who's unelected, right? He's works behind the scenes, as people were pointing out. But I mean, for that, of course, like he's bragging about his deep network. It's going to be interesting on how he's able to manage them, and I guess where his policies lie, what direction he wants to take the party in, if anything differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think he said he's like a continuity candidate, so I think we can be.
Yeah.
I think we can, and he's also a businessman. So I'm not gonna make any, and also worked in telecommunications. So I'm not a notably progressive industry, depending on what level you're at, obviously. But I'm not going to make any assumptions about him being more progressive than I would expect. But we'll have to wait and see.
Struggling to attract candidates, Ensemble Montréal has postponed its leadership race and has not rescheduled it yet.
I would not be surprised if the rate of participation goes high next election, because there's a lot of insatisfaction. It will probably be some kind of referendum on Valérie Plante's mandate so far.
Bérard expects fresh faces to join the mayoral race soon. He says a new upstart party is also within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, so I shed a single tear for Ensemble Montréal and their inability to find a mayoral candidate. And that's actually pretty interesting, because if there's nobody of talent sort of showing up, I mean, I'm assuming that there's going to be some out of work liberals, Montreal liberals, who might be willing to like step up to the plate in not too long.
Anthony Housefather, mayor of Montreal.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Focus indeed. So I'm just trying to, as various people have told me, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all.
I see Drew struggling with this next to me, just like and he's holding back.
In any case, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they can get some talent, because I mean, I think the sort of smart money would be on whoever they put forward, if they can put together even reasonably compelling sort of change candidate, or like we're going to address the things that Projet Montréal isn't addressing, but I think the challenge that Ensemble is facing is that they're for all the policies. Yeah, they're against Projet Montréal's probably like bike lanes, I'm guessing. They're probably against like pedestrian streets. Like those are going to be their like major objections. Those are the things that they get really freaked out about, but are they going to like address housing costs? Are they going to address grocery costs?
Unlikely.
Like, no, none of those things that are actually making people unhappy are the things that they're going to address.
Yeah, it's that thing where you have this kind of, like, we're talking about this kind of like increasing sort of dissatisfaction, or maybe the sheen of Projet Montréal has worn off after so many years now, but it's not enough to create some organized counter Projet Montréal block, right? Or like even to the best of their ability, I don't think Ensemble can really like gather much outside of like, I think they're going to be locked out. Maybe they might get some kind of wins. I wouldn't be surprised if they're, I mean, it's depending to see, but I feel like I'm thinking about those like protests, right, that happened like over the last few years, like sort of against the bike lanes in like Saint Michel and Park X. Maybe they can get a foothold there. Maybe, I mean, we'll see if they're able to like even like if that's even a sizable amount of people in that borough to sort of mobilize against Projet. But I mean, for the most part, I think Montrealers are kind of fine.
Yeah, I mean, you can lose a lot of boroughs and still win the city.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah. I think maybe
it's all about this sort of strategic. I mean, it's it's the sort of obviously the Ensemble I think would have more sort of a western sort of center of gravity, and Projet Montréal clearly like it emanates out from the plateau, like a mighty beacon.
Yeah.
And so it's a question of the coalition building around the edges, right? Like
Right,
who's
right.
gonna be able to pick up those extra couple seats on the North Shore and the North, the Rive Nord there.
Montreal North. I mean,
yeah.
I guess that'll depend on the candidates that for the mayoral race. We'll see who can.
Yeah, potentially, but yeah,
I'm sure some people are gonna claim that they can bring in those people in.
Yeah, quite possibly, and we'll see. But I think that'll be part of the calculation. I guess the other candidate that we didn't look on is I can't remember her name, Laurence
Oh yes, the current borough mayor of
VSP.
Park X,
Yeah.
Ville-Ray, Saint Michel. Seems like, I think from what I read, she was her focus was social housing, increasing money for that. I think giving a tax break to nonprofits who provide social housing. That seems to be the.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, naturally, it's like it's a smart move for these candidates to be bringing that up, right? I have friends in the nonprofit.
I could think of it like in terms of housing is top 2 for sure. So
yeah.
and there's not
Gold star for talking about it.
I mean, that's the interesting thing is like that'll be an interesting thing to watch is like because food is number 1, even if it's actually less money in terms of the overall increase and the budgetary burden. But I think it's just because it's something that people see multiple times per week when they go grocery shopping, and they just see those numbers go up all the time.
Right.
Whereas rent is a little more, you can sort of ignore it,
Right.
even if it's a much
Provincial.
bigger number. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if any municipal candidates start to talk about food prices. I mean, that would be interesting. But you have to get a little radical if you're gonna start to.
I want you to
talk
look at the
about-
camera and tell them that orders to the candidates that are watching. You have to get radical.
Candidates, I'd just like to address you right now and say that it might be interesting to create a network of municipally owned grocery stores. So maybe you consider getting on that.
What brave soul out there watching will take up Dru's call?
Yeah, who's ready to access the rich vein of voter support that will come from this policy proposal?
It's a smart one. It's a smart one. You see some cities in the U.S. I think experimenting.
I mean,
with that.
there's a progressive candidate for mayor of New York who actually just put out a video saying, "I will literally do that. I will I will create a network of publicly owned, grocery stores that will sell veggies and bread and everything else and at cost, basically, and partner with local farmers and all the whole deal." Yeah.
Look at that. That's what we like to hear. I think it's time to wrap things up.
Is it?
It is.
I don't know. I was just getting warmed up.
Really, after what, almost like 2 hours now.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think it might be time to wind down. Maybe
Reflect a
maybe
bit.
we can talk about 2025 in 1 year, 1 year's time.
Yeah. In a year's time, we'll have you back on to consider the year. No eclipses next year, but I'm sure there'll be some celestial event happening.
Yeah.
What do we got?
Some
Pluto's in Aquarius.
Some things may be eclipsed,
Oh,
even if it's not the sun.
I really like that. That was really good. Thank you, Dru, for coming on to the show, helping with me reflect on what 2024 meant for Montreal. All these
Absolutely a
different-
pleasure.
I mean, there's such a deluge of stories, but it's always a pleasure to have you on and discuss these things, get your perspective on these things, such as the fires in the Old Port, anti-NATO protests, by-elections, more like hello elections, because that's coming up next year. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about on that front. Thank you, dear viewer, dear listener, for giving us your time, for staying informed.
Yeah. Stay classy, Montreal, and
Stay
fight back in the class war.
Oh, there we go, man. You're dropping bombs today. These are great. All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. That's Metropolis for 2024. Take care.